Mr. Olympia 7 times. Mr. Universe 5 times. When the conversation turns to the greatest bodybuilders of all time, the name Arnold Schwarzenegger rises above the rest. But beyond the trophies and fame lies a man whose legacy is as controversial as it is legendary. Standing at 6'2" with a physique that redefined muscularity, Arnold didn't just win 7 Mr. Olympia titles. He changed the sport forever. He wasn't just a competitor. He became the face of bodybuilding itself. A larger-than-life figure who transformed a niche sport into a global phenomenon. But Arnold's rise to the top wasn't just about brute strength or perfect symmetry. It was about mind games and strategy. Behind the dazzling charm and his iconic victories was a man who manipulated the sport, the media, and even his own peers. This is the story of a young man from Austria who rose to conquer the bodybuilding world only to become one of its most divisive figures. A champion to some, a villain to others. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger like you've never seen him before. Born on July 30, 1947 in the small Austrian village of Thal, Arnold Schwarzenegger grew up in a household ruled by discipline, hardship, and an unrelenting desire to escape. Growing up after the Second World War in 1947, I was born and grew up with no food, starvation, and famine. My mother going around what they call hamstering, which means begging various different farmers for food so she had food for the children. And I had a very tough father that was sometimes physical and smacked us around. So I wanted to escape from that home. His father Gustav, a former Nazi party member and the village's police chief, was a strict authoritarian and a heavy drinker. Gustav demanded absolute obedience, often enforcing it through harsh beatings, an upbringing all too common in post-war Austria. My father was a very complicated guy. He was a victim of the Second World War, meaning that he was dragged into the war, became a soldier, a Nazi officer. He was buried under the rubble of buildings that collapsed on top of him for 3 days, and then he had back surgeries, and then he was shipped back home. So he was suffering from malaria, he was suffering from shrapnel moving around in his body. He was depressed, obviously, that they lost the war in the first place. So that must have had an impact on all these men, because everyone around me when I grew up was kind of drinking. The people only drink when they're really unhappy. So there was a lot of drinking going on, a lot of violence going on, hitting the kids. But young Arnold was different. He wasn't going to be just another small-town boy following orders. He wanted more. By his early teens, that hunger turned into action. Waking up at 6 o'clock every morning, Arnold would fetch milk from a nearby farm before beginning intense physical training under his father's watchful eye. A former curling champion, Gustav believed in discipline through sports, and he expected his sons to maintain rigorous physical conditioning. We had to earn breakfast, like you said. We had to do push-ups and sit-ups and compete, knee bends and all this stuff, running around the house in order to be allowed to have breakfast. Academically, Arnold was an average student, but he stood out in one critical way: his relentless work ethic. His father wanted him to become a police officer. His mother hoped he'd attend business school. But Arnold had other plans. Plans that neither of them could have ever imagined. One day, he caught a glimpse of a bodybuilder on television. That moment changed everything. Reg Park. I saw him in Hercules movies. Can you believe that? This guy won Mr. Universe 3 times, and then he was discovered in Rome and they saw him there and they said, "Oh my God, you are Hercules. We're going to send you to acting classes and you're going to play Hercules." And then Steve Reeves did the same thing, who was another Mr. Universe from 1950. So both of them became Hercules. I said to myself, if Reg Park could get in the movies, maybe when I go to America and I become the world's greatest bodybuilder, then they would ask me to go in the movies. Right then and there, Arnold knew he was going to be the greatest bodybuilder in the world, and beyond that, a global superstar. In 1950s Austria, bodybuilding was a joke. Those who lifted weights were mocked and dismissed as foolish. But Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't care. He had no interest in fitting in. He was chasing something bigger. At 15 years old, a simple decision would alter the course of his life forever. His soccer coach introduced him to weightlifting. And from the moment he stepped into the gym, Arnold was hooked. The iron called to him, and he answered with an obsession that would redefine not just his life, but the entire sport of bodybuilding. When I went to the gym, all of a sudden the guys were saying, "I can't believe this. You've been here for 3 months and you're bench pressing already 185 pounds. You know something, you have unbelievable talent, and look at your biceps. They're popping out already, and your calves. We should put you on a weightlifting club and then the weightlifting team, and you should become one of our lifters." And then all of a sudden, with the age of 16, I was already competing in weightlifting, and they took me from village to village. Within just 2 years, his relentless training transformed him. He wasn't just improving, he was dominating. But while Arnold was laser-focused on his future, his parents were terrified. My mother finally went to our house doctor and she said, "You got to help him because there's something wrong with my son. My son has pictures right above the wall there where he sleeps. The whole wall is covered with male bodies that are oiled up with little tiny trunks on. What is going wrong here with my son?" Finally the doctor, when he talked to me, he then calmed her down afterwards and says, "Look, I talked to your son. Your son is motivated. He takes this seriously." And he finally calmed her down that she got off my back. In 1965, Arnold's dreams of bodybuilding glory hit a major roadblock. He was conscripted into the Austrian army for mandatory military service. Assigned as a tank driver, his days were filled with grueling drills and strict discipline. But then an opportunity arose that he couldn't ignore. Arnold received an invitation to compete in the Mr. Europe Junior Bodybuilding competition in Germany. There was just one problem. The military refused to let him leave the base. For most soldiers, that would have been the end of the story. But Arnold wasn't like most soldiers. One night, driven by pure ambition, he scaled the barracks wall, crawled under a fence, and vanished into the night. Armed with nothing but the clothes on his back and just enough money to reach Germany, Arnold arrived at the competition with no gear, no plan, just sheer determination. But once he stepped on stage, none of that mattered. His physique was extraordinary for his age, razor-sharp definition, near-perfect symmetry, and a commanding presence. After an intense round of posing, he was crowned Mr. Europe Junior, his first major victory. After completing his military service, Arnold's career was about to explode. He landed a job at a gym in Munich, Germany, giving him exactly what he needed. Time to train, time to grow, and time to dominate. The man that actually discovered Arnold was a man by the name of Albert Buesek. Albert Buesek first discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger back in 1965 at one of Arnold's very first competitions called the Best Built Man in Europe. Albert convinced Arnold to come work for him at his gym in Munich, Germany. And Munich was obviously a very big city at the time. So that was kind of Arnold's first step into moving into a bigger spotlight. In 1966, Arnold took on the Mr. Europe competition. This time in the senior division, facing off against the most elite bodybuilders in Europe. At just 19 years old, he didn't just win. He annihilated the competition with arms measuring over 20 inches. His physique left the crowd in shock. Even the judges were in awe. So much so that they offered to pay for his trip to London to compete in the prestigious Mr. Universe competition. But then Arnold made a costly mistake. Just a week after his Mr. Europe victory, he entered another competition, the Strongest Man in Europe. This event, run by a rival organization, changed everything. By competing, Arnold lost the support of the Mr. Europe judges along with their financial backing for Mr. Universe. Suddenly, the golden opportunity he had been handed was ripped away. Now he had to find his own way to London. After weeks of scraping together every penny, Arnold finally arrived at the 1966 Mr. Universe competition. All of a sudden I won the Junior Mr. Europe and then I won the Mr. Europe and then second Mr. Universe. So by that time now I was 19 years old. I had over 20-inch arms. Everyone in London when I arrived at the Mr. Universe contest and I was 19 years old. They were standing outside the hotel and saying, "Oh, here he is. This is the guy." At 6'1" and 236 pounds, he was an imposing force on stage, but not enough. He placed second behind Chester Yorton. The loss crushed him. Arnold expected to win. Instead of sulking, Arnold did what champions do. He got back to work. He returned to Munich angrier and more determined than ever. I was so hungry. So therefore, every magazine that I could get a hold of, I bought. And then I had this whole library of magazines at home, old ones, newer ones, and old books on physical culture. And I read all this stuff and studied it carefully. And then I used my body kind of like as an experiment because I would do a certain exercise 40 reps, 40 times. So to know where would I be sore the next day, and then I would write it down because I wouldn't believe just what the magazine says because everyone needs different training. So I followed Reg Park's training, who was the Mr. Universe 3 times. So I followed his routine, but I wanted to know exactly what works for me. So slowly but surely I dissected the body and I figured out all of the exercises that I needed to do in order to be the best. Arnold wasn't going to let this loss define him. He would return stronger than ever and claim the Mr. Universe title. On September 23, 1967, at just 20 years old, Arnold Schwarzenegger made history, becoming the youngest Mr. Universe champion ever. A year later, he returned to the competition bigger, stronger, and more dominant than ever, claiming victory in the professional division of Mr. Universe. Little did he know that this moment would change his life forever. Shortly after his second Mr. Universe win, Arnold received a phone call that would reshape his future. On the line was Joe Weider, a legendary bodybuilding coach, publisher of Muscle Builder magazine, and the most powerful man in the sport. Weider had seen Arnold's potential and wanted to bring him to America. He invited Arnold to compete in the IFBB Mr. Universe competition in Miami and offered him a chance to train and work in California. Arnold was stunned. This was the dream he had envisioned since he was a boy in Austria. Without hesitation, he said yes. In September 1968, at just 21 years old, Arnold landed in America. He arrived with nothing but a gym bag, $20 in his pocket, and an unstoppable dream. He didn't speak a word of English, but that didn't matter. Settling into a small apartment in Venice Beach, Arnold began making a modest income from photos published in Joe Weider magazines. But more importantly, he stepped into the legendary Gold's Gym in Los Angeles, the mecca of bodybuilding. It didn't take long for him to establish himself as the most dominant figure in the gym. After all, he was the future of bodybuilding. Arnold had arrived, and this was only the beginning. Arnold's first attempt at the American version of Mr. Universe, however, ended in disaster. He was bested by the legendary Frank Zane, a reigning icon in the bodybuilding world at the time. I was absolutely convinced that I'm going to beat all the American bodybuilders, set me up as the new champion, become the greatest bodybuilder of all times. He's acting so arrogant and cocky like the winner, but he wasn't in shape because it was all about being big in size with him. When they announced the 4th place, 3rd place, and the 2nd place Arnold Schwarzenegger, I once was considered like the unbeatable guy, and now all of a sudden Frank Zane won. I think he was just used to winning all the time, landing in this country the first time, getting defeated by, as his words, a chicken with 17-inch arms. And my reply to that is, at least this chicken was very muscular and you weren't. I was so devastated. I was lying there in the middle of the night in bed in this hotel room and I thought the world is coming to an end. Weider had just moved to California too, and he wasn't offering scholarships for anybody except Arnold. So he only offered a contract to Arnold even though he lost the universe. I remember standing on stage and he's holding my hand up as the winner. He said, "Oh Frank, think about Arnold. Isn't he great? What potential he has. I'm going to fly him to California and build him up and make him into a real champion." I said, "Hey Joe, what about me? I just beat him for Mr. Universe." Never wanting to shy away from challenges, Arnold set his sights on the 1969 Mr. Olympia contest. The 1969 Mr. Olympia was the fifth annual event of a contest that was announced by Muscle Builder magazine as the most prestigious contest in the world. The Weider organization was proudly touting the relatively new competition as the best of the best. In 1969, the annual event was held at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York. 1 year earlier, the reigning Mr. Olympia Sergio Oliva was disappointed to discover that no other competitors had dared to show up in New York to challenge him for the title. In 1969, however, the scenario was undoubtedly different. A new bodybuilding superstar was on the horizon and ready to challenge Oliva for the title. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the young and cocky bodybuilding phenomenon, was plastered all over the Weider magazines during the last 12 months and promoted as the future of bodybuilding. The crowd of bodybuilding fans was looking forward to the clash of the titans. Sergio had his biggest fan base packed into the Brooklyn Academy of Music that night. However, the crowd was also anxiously anticipating the arrival of Schwarzenegger on stage. Featured extensively in Muscle and Mr. America magazines for the last year, Arnold had the hype and the momentum behind him. Weider was pushing for Arnold to take Sergio down and become the new Mr. Olympia. The Mr. Olympia only featured two competitors in 1969, Sergio Oliva and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Sergio stepped on stage first. His freakish proportions put his head and shoulders above the competition. The New York audience shouted encouragement to their hero as Sergio went through his posing routine, displaying the best physique on the planet. Arnold Schwarzenegger stepped on stage next to a resounding ovation. However, this was not the same bulky and pale bodybuilder that had lost the title to someone 50 pounds lighter than him 1 year earlier. The new version of Arnold was impressive, having spent the last 12 months training and refining his massive physique. Now he was at least 15 pounds lighter, displaying a hard, ripped, and tan physique that was the closest thing to unbeatable that night. When Sergio and Arnold were brought out together on stage, the judges asked the two competitors to hit their best poses so they could decide a winner in such a close contest. Sergio hit a frightening most muscular pose while Arnold glided into a magnificent three-quarter-back pose. After several non-stop minutes of intense posing, the judges reconvened backstage to try to pick a winner. After taking a poll of all the judges, it was decided by a narrow 1-point vote that Sergio Oliva would be crowned Mr. Olympia for the third year in a row. Although Arnold's face registered obvious disappointment, he quickly regained his composure and wrapped his massive arms around Sergio's shoulders and gave him a kiss on the cheek. However, there was no doubt in Arnold's mind that he would be back in 1970 to take the title and be recognized as the greatest bodybuilder in the world. The 1970 IFBB Mr. Olympia, Mr. America, and Mr. World contests were held on October 3, 1970 at Town Hall in New York City. The crowd was screaming for both Sergio and Arnold to come on stage. This was the true battle of the giants, the myth versus the Austrian oak. Reg Lewis, 1963 IFBB Mr. America, also decided to enter the Mr. Olympia that year. Reg displayed the more symmetrical and polished physique that was popular a decade earlier. While Reg was posing in front of the sold-out auditorium at Town Hall, the real contest was taking place in the warm-up room. Sergio and Arnold got into a heated argument on who would pose last. Sergio taunted Arnold, telling him that he was a nobody while Sergio was still the reigning Mr. Olympia. Interestingly, Arnold had defeated Sergio just 2 weeks earlier at the AAU Mr. World contest in Columbus, Ohio. Despite this, Arnold dropped the argument and allowed Sergio to pose last. Sergio was big, but he was too smooth. But he was really big. Arnold was really at his best that year compared to 69. He was bigger. He was more cut. And then he had just beaten Sergio in Columbus, Ohio, like 2 weeks earlier. The story was he told Sergio. They all went out to dinner afterwards and Sergio was shocked that Arnold beat him because he had beaten him the year before. So then Sergio said, "I can't believe you beat me, Arnold." And Arnold said, "Sergio, if you would have been just a little bigger, I wouldn't be able to touch you." So then Sergio goes home to Chicago and eats for the next 2 weeks and gets bigger, but he gets fatter. When Arnold stepped on stage, the improvements from a year ago were immediately evident. Arnold was bigger than last year, but still in great shape with detailed definition and separation. His posing was superb with each pose perfectly executed. His routine was strong and powerful with such iconic poses as his front double biceps, side chest, and three-quarter-back pose all looking spectacular. When Arnold left the stage, even the most fierce Olympia supporters were cheering for him. Sergio took his time stepping on stage. As the reigning king of bodybuilding, Sergio milked the audience for all the applause he could before finally making his entrance. Bigger than ever before, it was clearly evident that Sergio had sacrificed quality for quantity. He was still displaying his magnificent shape with his tiny waist offset by his huge chest and arms and his massive thighs. However, the magnificence of Olympia's physique was overshadowed by excess fat and oil. The sharp details and hard lines that had made Sergio a physical phenomenon from 1967 to 1969 were no longer present. Finally, all three Mr. Olympia competitors were brought on stage for the final pose down. Reg Lewis stood off to the side while Arnold and Sergio battled it out for the title. Arnold hit his front double biceps pose while Sergio brought the house down with the famous Olympia most muscular. Then Arnold pulled a little trick on him. We were doing pose off after pose off. And then I said to him, I think it's enough. I think they must know by now who is going to be the winner. And he says, you're right. And then he walked off and they pointed at him like he's giving up. So it was like kind of a psychological little trick to close the deal once and for all. The trick worked. Arnold looked like the hungry champion and Sergio appeared to be the defeated loser. The pose down eventually came to an end and the audience waited in anticipation as the judges calculated the final scores. Finally, promoter Bud Parker approached the microphone and announced the winner of the 1970 Mr. Olympia, the one and only Arnold Schwarzenegger. The crowd of former Olympia supporters cheered the decision as a happy Arnold stepped on stage with Joe Weider. Weider held a beautiful silver plate with a cash prize of $1,000 on top. Arnold Schwarzenegger was now the king of bodybuilding at only 23 years of age. He had done the impossible by defeating the invincible Sergio Olympia and becoming the youngest Mr. Olympia ever. In 1971, the Mr. Olympia contest was held in France, marking the first time the event took place in Europe. Since the contest began in 1965, the Mr. Olympia event had taken place in New York City. The International Federation of Bodybuilders was continuing to work hard to include a more international field of athletes in their organization. However, they were competing with organizations like the AAU in the United States and NABA in Europe. Beginning in 1971, Ben Weider made a shocking announcement to all the IFBB athletes. If anyone competed in a non-sanctioned IFBB event, they would be suspended from competing in the IFBB for a full year. Due to this rule, several major competitors would not be allowed to compete this year. Among those athletes was Sergio Olympia, who had competed in the NABA Mr. Universe contest in London just 1 week earlier, where he lost to the legendary Bill Pearl. Other notable athletes who were banned from competing in the Mr. Olympia contest in Paris included Frank Zane, Ken Waller, Roy Callender, and Franco Columbu. With all the other contenders banned from the contest, the only highlight of the evening was the posing routine of the reigning Mr. Olympia Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had prepared for this contest with the intensity and dedication required for a rematch with Sergio. He never thought that he would be unopposed at the 1971 Mr. Olympia. The physique that Arnold presented to the judges and the audience in Paris was nothing but spectacular. Weighing nearly 250 pounds, Arnold was massive. His 22-inch arms and broad chest were incredible to see. Even his legs, which were once criticized, looked amazing, bigger and more defined than ever. The 1972 Mr. Olympia is considered to be the greatest and also one of the most controversial bodybuilding contests of all time. Held outside of the U.S. for only the second time since its inception, the 1972 Mr. Olympia featured a much-anticipated matchup between reigning champion Arnold Schwarzenegger and multi-Olympia winner Sergio Oliva. The showdown would take place in October at the Handelshof in Essen, Germany. The clash between bodybuilding's top two giants was, according to many, the defining matchup of 1972. However, it would have been unwise to overlook the rest of the field. One of the most impressive lineups in Golden Era history graced the stage, featuring no less than 4 current or future Mr. Olympia winners: reigning champion Arnold Schwarzenegger, multi-time winner Sergio Oliva, future Mr. Olympia champions Frank Zane and Franco Columbu. Completing the classic lineup was the 1970 Mr. Europe winner Serge Nubry. When the 72 Olympia lineup walked into the small warm-up room, which doubled as the prejudging room, it became obvious the area would be too small for the 6-man lineup. Before the judging could commence, a room large enough to contain the world's best physiques would be needed. Schwarzenegger had a plan and suggested a larger room that would be good for the competition, but would also provide him with a personal advantage. Back in the Golden Era's earliest beginnings, all Olympia judging was done during the prejudging. Posing routines and any additional comparisons would be exclusively for the benefit of the audience. As expected, Arnold and Sergio towered over the rest of the competition. To the trained eye, Sergio appeared to have a clear advantage with his superior muscle size and naturally impressive physique. Arnold, being Arnold, used his intelligence to outsmart Oliva. As Schwarzenegger later admitted, the room he had specifically requested earlier featured a black backdrop. A room with a darker backdrop would showcase his skin tone better and allow Oliva to blend into the background. Arnold also appeared to stand closer to the front of the stage, thus conveying an illusion of greater size. The optical advantages Arnold had manipulated made a huge difference. Sergio placed second while Arnold took his third Olympia crown, much to the collective dismay of those in attendance. Bodybuilding historians and seasoned Golden Era competitors almost unanimously agree that Sergio Oliva should have won in Essen. He didn't deserve it. Sergio should have won. Oh yeah. He was in great shape, but Arnold was a month out. He was a month away, but they gave it to him because it was in Germany. Arnold's fellow competitors Zane, Columbu, and Nubry would continue to carve out successful bodybuilding careers of their own, except for Oliva, who promptly retired after the event. Confident that he would win in 72 and feeling dejected following the controversial outcome, the myth quit the IFBB. Even Arnold admitted that he was off. He said he was a couple pounds off. He said, if I would have been a judge, would have picked Sergio. But he said the reason why he won was, he said, it was European judges and the Europeans like a bigger guy. And he said, I'm bigger than Sergio because I'm taller. But he goes, I wasn't at my best. I was a couple pounds off. And he goes, if I would have been a judge, would have picked Sergio. The 1973 Mr. Olympia was held on September 8, 1973, along with the IFBB Mr. America and Mr. World events. The 1973 Mr. Olympia was a historic event. This was the main competition that was featured in the book Pumping Iron, released by Simon & Schuster in 1974. Now in its 9th year, the Olympia was still struggling to grow in the number of competitors. Only overall winners of either the Mr. World or the Mr. Universe were eligible to compete in the Mr. Olympia. So it truly was an elite group. The first competitor on stage was the great Serge Nubry from France. Serge displayed a thick but extremely aesthetic physique. His tiny waist combined with his massive pecs, shoulders, and arms transformed his front poses into artistic masterpieces. Franco Columbu bounded on stage to the roar of the packed New York audience. Franco had made his mark in bodybuilding over the last 5 years since moving to America from Italy, courtesy of Joe Weider. Now it was time for the king. Arnold Schwarzenegger slowly walked on stage to the roar of the bodybuilding-crazed crowd. This was the guy they had waited hours to see. Arnold stood on stage facing the audience and he casually flexed his incredible calves for the benefit of the audience. Arnold had injured his knee just 1 year ago. He wanted to prove to the judges and the crowd that he had fully recovered and was better than ever. Opening up his body to an incredible front double biceps pose, the audience erupted into chaos. For the next few minutes, Arnold hit one trademark pose after another with perfect precision and grace. After his close and controversial call over Sergio in 1972, Arnold was in the best condition of his life for the 1973 Mr. Olympia. His physique was so refined and sculpted, it bordered on perfection. Arnold was big, thick, ripped, and totally aesthetic. He was the epitome of what Mr. Olympia represented in 1973, the most perfectly developed male physique. Arnold accepted his trophy on stage from his longtime girlfriend Barbara Outland. Franco took second place, followed by Serge Nubri in third. This was Arnold Schwarzenegger's fourth consecutive Mr. Olympia, and he was now indisputably the king of bodybuilding. What made this victory even more special was that it was captured by the team of Gaines and Butler, forever immortalizing it in the iconic book Pumping Iron. The 1974 Mr. Olympia contest was somewhat of a milestone in the history of bodybuilding's biggest competition because of the emerging media attention it began to attract. Despite the widespread prejudice and misunderstanding directed toward the bodybuilding community by the general public, Sports Illustrated magazine was intrigued. This unique subculture prompted Sports Illustrated to send one of their top writers to cover the topic in a substantial 10-page article featured in their October 14, 1974 issue. The often misunderstood sport of bodybuilding was approached with both curiosity and respect by reporter Richard W. Johnston. The timing couldn't have been better for the nation's leading sports magazine. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the reigning Mr. Olympia, was set to defend his title for the fifth and final time that very weekend. The event would be held in New York City at the prestigious Felt Forum in Madison Square Garden. At the peak of his career and with his eyes set on soon conquering the world, Schwarzenegger impressed the reporter from Sports Illustrated so much that he received the distinction of being labeled the most extraordinary athlete anywhere today, as well as the most perfectly developed male in history. The nearly sold-out crowd at the 4,500-seat Felt Forum witnessed bodybuilding history as a perfectly sculpted Schwarzenegger easily cruised to his fifth Mr. Olympia victory, defeating his new challenger, 22-year-old Lou Ferrigno. Ferrigno, already a two-time Mr. Universe winner, was hailed as the sport's next big thing in recent issues of Joe Weider's Muscle Builder and Power magazine. At 6'5" and weighing 260 pounds, they expected Big Louie to give Schwarzenegger the challenge previously presented by former champ Sergio Oliva. Unfortunately, Lou had overdone it for the 1974 Mr. Olympia and did not present the dominating mass shown by the confident Schwarzenegger. Only 6 days earlier, a ripped and massive Ferrigno had easily dominated the competition to win his second consecutive Mr. Universe title in Verona, Italy. However, Arnold stepped onto the Olympia stage in the best shape of his life and at his heaviest ever, weighing a staggering 237 pounds of superbly sculpted perfection. In the end, he and Lou faced off in a pose down before a roaring crowd of passionate bodybuilding fans. It was obvious to even a novice observer that Arnold had more muscle mass and diamond-hard quality to his physique than his younger opponent did. This was despite being 3 inches shorter and weighing 23 pounds less than the hulking Ferrigno. After years of domination in the bodybuilding world, Arnold had defeated all the top champions of the sport several times over with 5 Mr. Universe titles and 5 Mr. Olympia victories. This was to be his final time on stage and he wanted to end his illustrious career with a bang by competing in his best condition ever. As he stood on stage posing with his trophy alongside Joe Weider and Lou Ferrigno, Arnold was at his absolute peak. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not only Mr. Olympia, but as Sports Illustrated magazine accurately noted, the most perfectly developed human being on the planet. One of the worst-kept secrets in bodybuilding history was the making of the 1977 documentary Pumping Iron. The film introduced the world to the underground culture of bodybuilding like never before. But Pumping Iron didn't just showcase Arnold's victory. It also ignited one of the biggest controversies in bodybuilding history. If you're looking at the movie Pumping Iron, most people didn't know Arnold retired after 74. George Butler had to entice him out. Jerome Gary, who co-produced with George, told me they offered Arnold $50,000 and 5% of the cut of the film to get him to compete again. So if any of the competitors knew at that time that Arnold's being paid $50,000 to compete and Charles Gaines is going to judge the contest, a lot of them are going to say what the hell. The documentary famously highlights Arnold's rivalry with Lou Ferrigno, framing it as the ultimate battle between the reigning king and the hungry challenger. Lou, training in a dim, cramped Brooklyn gym under the watchful eye of his overbearing father, is cast as the underdog, while Arnold basks in the California sunshine, effortlessly joking with friends at Gold's Gym. It's a perfect narrative, the young lion versus the seasoned alpha, but it wasn't entirely true. Ferrigno later revealed that the dynamic between him and Arnold was exaggerated for dramatic effect. The tension, the pressure, and even the father-son dynamic were dialed up to create a story, not just a competition. Arnold, of course, knew exactly how to portray the role the film required. He treated pumping iron like a stage. And on that stage, he was the villain. A charming, calculating mastermind who was always 2 steps ahead of his competitors. I remember once when he said, "I'm going to give Franco all the wrong advice because he listens to me like I'm his mother." That was right in the film. Well, when that film came out, the friendship between Franco and Arnold almost ended. Franco is pretty smart, but Franco is a child. And when it comes to the day of the contest, I'm his father. He comes to me for advice. So it's not that hard for me to give him the wrong advice. And then there's the infamous story Arnold tells in the film, the moment when he claims to have skipped his own father's funeral because it conflicted with his training. "It was in a way a sad story when my father died because my mother called me on the phone and she said your dad died and this and that. And I said, well, when is the funeral? She said, well, it's in 2 days. I said, well, I can't come because I'm training for a contest." Now later on, I found out that this was not an accurate statement that he made to the press. The truth behind the story was far more complex. Arnold had actually attended his father's funeral, but the filmmakers encouraged him to tell a different version. One that would cement his image as a man so obsessed with winning that nothing, not even family tragedy, could derail his focus. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of pumping iron wasn't what was shown, it was what happened behind the scenes. Arnold's victory at the 1975 Mr. Olympia wasn't just about superior conditioning or training. It was about superior strategy, both on and off the stage. Arnold had retired after his 5th consecutive victory in 1974, walking away as the undisputed king. But the lure of Hollywood and the promise of the documentary brought him back for one final competition. What most competitors didn't know was that Arnold was being paid $50,000 to participate in the film, a massive sum that gave him resources his competitors simply didn't have. More importantly, one of the co-authors of the original Pumping Iron book, Charles Gaines, was serving as a judge at the 1975 contest. The conflict of interest was glaring, but it went largely unnoticed at the time. When Arnold stepped onto the stage in Pretoria, South Africa, for what would be his final competition, he wasn't just facing Lou Ferrigno, Serge Nubret, and Franco Columbu. He was competing in a contest where the narrative had already been written, where his victory would provide the perfect ending to a documentary that needed a champion. #Epilogue, the making of a legend. The 1975 Mr. Olympia marked the end of Arnold Schwarzenegger's competitive bodybuilding career, but it was really just the beginning of his transformation into a global icon. At 28 years old, he had achieved everything the sport had to offer: 7 Mr. Olympia titles, 5 Mr. Universe crowns, and a legacy that would endure long after he hung up his posing trunks. But Arnold's greatest victory wasn't any single competition. It was his ability to see beyond the sport itself. While his competitors were focused on the next contest, Arnold was already envisioning movie screens, political stages, and business empires. The young man who had once stared at pictures of Reg Park and Steve Reeves playing Hercules had done more than follow in their footsteps. He had rewritten the playbook entirely. Arnold didn't just become the greatest bodybuilder of all time, he used bodybuilding as a launching pad to become something no one in the sport had ever been before: a a true crossover superstar. Years later, when asked about his competitive career, Arnold would reflect on those early days with a mixture of pride and pragmatism. He had dominated a sport, helped bring it into the mainstream, and created a legend that would outlive any trophy. The Austrian oak had fallen, but from its roots grew something far more powerful, a Hollywood action hero, a successful businessman, and eventually, the governor of California. The small village boy who had once dreamed of escape had not only freed himself from the confines of Thal, Austria, but had shown the world that with enough ambition, intelligence, and sheer force of will, any dream was possible. This was Arnold Schwarzenegger before he became a household name. A champion who understood that winning wasn't just about having the best physique, it was about having the best strategy, the best story, and the vision to see beyond the competition itself. The legend was complete. The superstar was about to be born.